My name's Martin McMillan. I'm the CEO and founder of Pollen VC. We help developers calculate lifetime values, and we put money into growth capital for user acquisition, if it makes sense. So what we wanted to do today is pull together some guys in the industry who have been through scaling games using paid user strategy successfully. And ideally what we'd love is for you guys to come away with some kind of actionable insights from people who've been through the scaling process using user acquisition on a paid basis. And so we're going to go through, and we've got some questions that we kind of hacked out between us earlier on. And hopefully we're going to have time for maybe a few minutes of Q&A at the end. So I'll hand over to John. Guys, just do a very quick round of intros.
Sure. Hey guys, I'm John Hayward Mayhew, currently running a company called 2Chill, and we do a lot of marketing, but also have a pretty large social casino portfolio. So.
Hi, I'm Christopher Farm. I run a company called Tengen. We build a lot of growth infrastructure.
Cool. My name is Bethany. I manage the analytics and UA initiatives for Monkey Fun. We're a mobile gaming developer.
Great. Cool. Thanks, guys. So one of the things that we often see as a company is guys who come through the door and say, "Look, I think my metrics look really good in a soft launch, whatever." And looking at how metrics translate from a soft launch into a hard launch, into a global, into a scaling up environment. So it seems like there's a lot of pitfalls that once you decide to hit the gas, where things can come unstuck. So I guess first question for you guys is any kind of real life experiences you've been through from looking at a set of soft launch metrics into actually what happens when you start to hit the gas. John, do you want to take that one first?
So we're pretty unsophisticated about this. We essentially look at, hey, we'll launch a game, throw it up on Facebook with the Facebook ads, throw like $100, $200 through it, see how much money we make back that first day or two, and then we kind of just like pretend that's our LTV for now. And then if we have that, very low LTV, when we know people are going to retain 90, 120 days, if we base it off that first few days, then it's so much more profitable when we have a low CPI that we're chasing all day long. So it's kind of how we do our soft launches.
So we have a lot of developers that try to figure out this problem. And one of the interesting things that I've seen happen is they do a lot of, maybe they kind of do too much, but there's a lot of analysis around statistics that they use to figure out, should I buy X amount of installs, and that amount of installs correlates to a certain probability that they can keep acquiring that fashion. So they can do a lot of math around trying to figure out, if you have a certain statistical significance of acquiring 1,000 installs for your game or for your app or whatever, and you back out to X ROI, they can, with heavy confidence, keep spending there or not spend there anymore. So that's one of the things that we see when people go from soft launch. They try to figure out how many installs that they need to get to some level of confidence where they can get a certain level of LTV or ROI from that budget. And then with that confidence, they can either spend more or up it or not.
Well, I guess one of the things with us, we go into soft launch expecting our KPIs to be higher and our CPIs to be lower than what they will be when we do our full launch. And so a lot of that ends up getting baked in, which, whenever you increase your budget, you're going to have this issue. So.
Yeah, it seems, again, one of the things we've seen is people assuming, I think a big mistake is assuming a set of metrics is just going to hold when you start to hit the gas. So I think you've got to build in almost like some level of install costs rising, and probably lifetime, if you're trying to do it at real scale, then lifetime value is dropping because the audience that you're able to target is just not as good, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Or slightly the reverse. You could, in some cases, we've seen people acquire a small sample set of users, and then their LTVs are really high. But then when they actually acquire a lot, then it's much lower because the generic set is larger. So like to account for that, people will generally just try to figure out like how many installs you really need to figure that out.
And any advice to, I mean, is there a range? I mean,
it's hard to know, depending on like the kind of app that you're trying to deal with. You generally start off guessing. It seems I've seen developers just start off guessing, I guess, but overall there is some statistical stuff that people will do to figure out like I need X amount of installs to prove some type of thing.
10,000, 5,000? Well, what would be a sensible range, right? If you're sitting here thinking, okay, to start, I mean, to John's point, I'm spending a few $100 here or there, I'm getting some really early stuff. At what point do you have a level of confidence that you start to think this could become scalable? I mean, maybe that's not a fair question. But
I think right off the bat, you can see, like after 100, 200 installs, you can start to see, but to get a real base, I would say 1,000 installs through your funnel, and then you should have a pretty good grasp on it. But to your point, it's if you're running the social casino and you're going after Win 40 plus, which is the perfect target for the first 1,000, and then when you try to scale, you go after men 18 to 35 and men 16-year-olds and whatnot. It's not going to be the same, right? So I think that's where a lot of people kind of run into a problem is they think, oh, let's scale it, so let's jump outside of our perfect demographic.
Yeah, the key is to have a very methodical approach to this, which is like see how much budget you have at first, and then you should have like an intuition about what your user base is. And really, you're trying to confirm that that's your user base. So you could use like a channel that allows you to figure out your user base, right? Something like Facebook, and I don't really want to rat hole into Facebook, but you can, on Facebook, like target specific, you can say like, I want 1,000 males. I want 1,000 males that are 25, and see all these different parameters and back out to like, what is the actual users that I'm trying to get to? And then you just see all the metrics that follow that and try and follow that behavior. And you can tweak your game for those customers as well and all that sort of stuff.
Cool, yeah, it seems that a lot of people go to Facebook as the first port of call, figure out the audience, but then start to look outside thereafter. Is that fair?
Yeah, and one of the things that I've also seen people do is, it's pretty interesting, they're willing to sacrifice up front to be ROI negative on Facebook, and then they find the cohorts that work for them, and then they try to acquire them elsewhere because they're cheaper. So you might sacrifice up front your ROI, find like the LTVs that are really good, and then try to replicate that on another channel, which have cheaper CPIs, and then you make up everything on that channel. So I've seen strategies like this.
Cool, very interesting. So next question was going to be around kind of like the shifting sands, right? Nothing in this world ever stays the same for very long. What kind of and there's a lot of trend towards away from just purely the install and looking beyond the install into different actions. Is that something that you guys focus and really buy into? And what sort of things? How do you sort of how do you figure out the events basically that are the most relevant for your games?
Okay, so for us in general, that is what we do. We've tried just doing basic installs, but then you sacrifice quality, especially if we're a small company, we don't have giant pockets. We don't have the luxury of testing Facebook out to find that perfect audience. So we look for different metrics. We generally start with our purchase. We're very fortunate in that our products purchase, like first purchase is usually like day of install. So it's an early enough in the funnel. And then from there, like that's not always the best one. So we look at what our behaviors players are most likely going to do that will end in high quality. And that's kind of the next step that we've done as we continue to grow our user base.
Kind of the same with us is we are looking at those down funnel things like, hey, we know if somebody gets to level 7, then they're going to be a very valuable user, and they're going to be here for half a year or a year, while the people who only get to level 2, they're not as good. So we optimize for those events as well. And then of course purchases, simply because that's how you make money. So if you're always optimizing for purchase, yes, the CPIs are going to be much higher, but we all know the CPI doesn't really matter if it's bringing in $100 and it ends up being a $10 CPI instead of $1. Now that being said, I'm a big believer in just Facebook and their optimization. So yes, let your purchase campaigns run, but at the same time, get your easy installs as well by just optimizing for app installs. So I see a lot of people, they say, oh, let's start optimizing for purchase, and they totally shut down their regular installs. And I don't necessarily agree with that, because you still need the volume to be up there in the charts and all that good stuff.
So keep a lot of different horses running.
Right. I will argue, though, charts don't mean anything. Like, if you can't turn on the lights, like it seems really silly. You're sitting here and you're talking about scaling, and at the end of the day, it has to be ROI positive. And that's always a risk to take when you are looking for a new audience group, right? Like that's what you're doing when you're not targeting for a specific purchase or a specific event. You're trying to find people that might not have fit that mold. And that's really a question of, can you sustain it?
Yeah, I mean, you should only really chart when you know that everything backs out. Because charting, you're gonna get users that you have no idea about, like you know nothing about them. And so your game at that point has to have really good broad appeal. Whereas like when you start off small, you can start very targeted, like know your customer very well first. And then if you're trying to build a game for that group of users, like just build a game for that user. And like, you can do very well doing that. But if you're trying to build a broad appeal game, then charting can matter, but it's much harder to do in that sense.
And going back to charting, when I'm talking about charting, I'm talking about like keyword charting. So it's a little different I mean, the only good reason of charting is you get all of the advertising networks to hit you up all day long saying this and that. But if you have a CPI campaign going just for the install, if I'm bidding after casino and you're bidding after casino and you're only going after purchasers, you're spending $5 per install, while I'm spending 60 cents per install, my rank for casino is going to be much higher than anybody else's. But I do agree with the charting.
So I guess in terms of, so everything's coming back to metrics, right? So whilst changing creative, all these things are super important. Ultimately, the winners in the space are those who are really on top of the metrics, where you can understand and where you can, very importantly, interpret them. So I guess to each of you guys, is there something, everyone's swimming in the sea of metrics, right? Have you figured out things for your businesses, or Chris, for things that you see across the developers you work with, where there's a recurring thing? It's back to certain key kind of ingredients in a particular recipe, or is everyone's recipe different based on what works for them?
Everyone cares about LTV and cash flow, but beyond that, everyth's different for every developer. Games, it's all over the map. They care about different things, because like your game's it's your product, and so your customers are going to be different because your product's different. Those customers care about certain things that another game's not going to care about. For non-games, yeah, it's pretty new. They track everything.
It seems that people sort of track everything, and then kind of it filters out into certain key things. So obviously LTV is important. I asked the question because we see lots of people focus on things that are quite different, but I guess it's a case of trialing everything, whittling it down into figure out what's important for your business, see how that performs for your business, and then focus on optimizing that.
Sometimes, I mean, it's kind of like if you track everything, it can be overwhelming, and then you don't know what to do with it. We actually recommend to our customers, like, don't track more than 10 KPIs. There's a lot of intuition that comes with building any type of product. So whenever you build a product, you're gonna try and like come up with some metrics to like go after that specific product or game or whatever it is. That's actually a really hard exercise to do, and you should spend a lot of time thinking intuitively like what matters. There's sort of this like theory that people have that the moment you come up with a metric, it becomes irrelevant. I mean, you should really spend a lot of time to think about it though.
And bake it in early, right? So don't launch, track everything, and then figure it out. Trying to build it from the ground up, saying this is the type of product, these are the things that we think are going to be important. Cool. John, anything to?
I agree with you. Don't track too much stuff, or else it gets overwhelming, and then you feel like you're failing all the time because I'm chasing after this metric and that metric. I don't know how to compute all this. It's annoying. But so we personally track, pretty basics: retention and average revenue per user. Not so much daily active user. I think it's a little too difficult sometimes. So.
Yeah. So just to go on with that, some of the stuff we do is like ARPDAO, things like that, to measure consistency with revenue. Customers track how well they retain compared to others. We are one of those companies that track literally everything, and a lot of that's just become part of our growth. Depending on what day it is, it depends on how you're going to define fun. And that's kind of one of our things when we look at when it comes to KPIs is what does fun mean right now? And maybe that means that they are joining an alliance. Great, well, what's our alliance rate? All right, we need to keep this at X. And then eventually, you're right, it does become irrelevant because that's going to maintain. Well, great, now this is the metric we're tracking. So follow that.
So it sounds like you guys are pretty tightly integrated with the product team as well. So I guess organizationally designing, obviously depending the size of the company, but those feedback loops to feedback, what we're looking for in terms of a product and what that means in terms of metrics and so on as well. So is that something you guys are you're obviously a tight team of people?
We are a tight team of people, yes. We sync at minimum weekly. Usually there's daily syncs in like Slack of this is what's happening. Here's the numbers we're looking at. This is what we need to fix, and going with the design team and tweaking those things as well.
Yeah, no, so it's super important to be integrated because, again, from our point of view, we've seen kind of BI teams just swimming in metrics the whole time, but really not having that proper sync up with the product, which is just a missed opportunity. Mm-hmm. Cool. And in terms of attribution and measurement and so on as well. I mean, kind of leading on from metrics. So obviously, you need to know where those users are coming from, the quality of the users, any fraudulent installs, and particularly the organic uplift as well, and the organic uplift from which particular paid channels. How do you guys look at that, John?
Again, we just use Facebook. So
okay, so it's easy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not trying to pitch Facebook here or anything.
Okay, so we track everything with Adjust and bring things in that way. When it comes to fraudulent stuff, we don't look very hard right now at it. It's a hot topic. It comes up in all these conferences. People should do it. But, I mean, it's fine. Worst answer ever. But no, so we bring that in. We've worked with our data team and our engineers to bring in the data sources from all the different networks. So we do try to explore some other ones to measure ROI and profitability. And so they bring that in, and then we have our own in-house analytics system. So with all of that, we're able to track the cost of each action. So as I mentioned before, it's, well, how are we defining fun right now? All right, well, it's going to cost $2 to define fun as people playing in a PvP battle. Cool. What metric then, or what channel brings fun players in? So on and so forth.
Cool. And
I mean,
Chris,
I obviously
closest
agree.
to your heart, right?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously agree. You need to have a system that's basically, you can capture everything and query anything that you can, and understand like where each user comes from, how much they cost, what they're doing in your app. Being able to tie all that together is important.
In terms of going back and forth and analyzing this stuff, do you guys have it baked into a routine? Is it a daily routine or a weekly routine to analyze stuff? How do you almost carve up the day to make sure that things are happening that you expect to be happening, and importantly, if something's not happening, you've got time to chop it?
Okay, cool. So that's one of my main hats at Monkey Fun, actually. So when it comes to big design changes, those we force a meeting once a week I say force very loosely, but where we sit down and we go through it. These were the changes we implemented. This is the results. With UA, we actually track it officially every morning. We meet with the execs and go over like what are our numbers, what needs to be modified. But it's actually something we constantly monitor throughout the day. So there's a chart that we use Tableau, and we create a pretty picture. And it's, oh, did the picture change the way it wasn't supposed to? Great, we need to go now dig and look into that. And it's just part of the routine.
This is a pretty interesting question, actually, because people definitely use us every day, but it's even getting faster than that now. I kind of liken this to the world of like the stock market. Like in the beginning, the stock market was you call up a broker and you're like, give me 100 shares of Microsoft. And then, a day later, you'll have 100 shares. It's kind of like that when you're buying ads now. And then we moved into like the world of E-Trade. You can go into E-Trade and like push a button and buy some shares. That's kind of, we're like barely in that world right now. Now, like the stock market is, you've got computers buying stuff like every sub-second. We start to see people building in that direction. Like we provide data warehouses to people, and they're using that data like very, very quickly, and they're like redeploying it back into the system like immediately as soon as like insights are determined. They'll use things like AI on top of it, and then they'll be like, oh, this AI found out that this thing's working. I'm just gonna like create a campaign on my own, and like there's no human there. So that's like on the very, very sophisticated side though. But we've seen it work. People have gotten like upwards of 20% ROI uplift just by doing stuff like that.
Right.
So I can totally see a world where data is like very, very important for this. But the first thing is you have to get all your data in one place. And then once it's in one place, you can start building these types of things on top of it and automating the whole process.
So you go from a pretty static environment to like a high frequency, low latency,
exactly.
where time is the advantage.
Yeah. So your question was originally like, how fast do people check? Daily now, but we're seeing hints of sub-second. So we'll see. Yeah.
Very interesting. So I think we're almost out of time. I don't know if maybe there's time for maybe just one question for the panel from the guys. Can't actually see any hands, so dazzled. Or if not, then I think we're probably sort of running to time. So just like to thank everyone very much for participating.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.